great halls of their house, there are assembled three who hope to one day be the world's greatest driving heroes. Created from the cosmic legends of the universe comes our team captain, the Vision Bill Fisher. Their soon-to-be Wonder Woman, Vicky Fisher. Our Captain Marvel and head flight trainee, Jennifer Skripchuk. And our Batman, the master of tools, gadgets, and all things mechanical. Our mild-mannered soon-to-be billionaire, Alan Danvers. Their mission, to fight injustice, share what is right and wrong, to get you out of your house and come out racing with them, and serve all mankind. They are the Garage Heroes in Training Team.
Welcome to the Garage Heroes in Training Podcast. I'm going to be your host for this episode, and my name is Bill. Who's hosting?
This is Vicky.
I'm Jennifer.
Why were you puzzled with your name? Anyway, so we have a guest this week. We have someone who I was following a series of articles in Grass Roots Motorsports. That was where I first met her, and then I started reading all the articles I could find, and then I found a way to send her an email in Grass Roots Motorsports that I have no idea if she could ever see, or if she wrote back that I would ever know how to find it. But that was how this originally started. Then I stalked her on Instagram and found her. She has a NASA time trial instructor, and she also participates in SCCA races, hard for me to say, the Secret Car Club of America, which we have never done, but we're looking forward to that. And we'd like to welcome Christina Lam to the podcast. Welcome.
Hi, thank you guys for having me. Hope you guys are doing well, and thank you guys for your time. I'm really excited to do this podcast with you guys.
Wow.
We're very excited to have you.
I know. I just really want somebody to be excited after the podcast. That would be awesome. They always come in.
Stop. It's a good podcast.
All right. Very well. You don't even listen to it. Anyway.
I'm here for it.
Anyway. So Christina, just in case I do horrible intros or in case people aren't familiar with you, could you give kind of like a little background of yourself?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. So I'm Christina Lam. I raced my E46 M3 in SCCA Majors and Hoosier Super Tour. We race in T1, and I also race in NASA in their Super Touring 2 class. I am a Skip Barber racing instructor, and in the past I have officiated for many NASA events as well as their national events.
Where do you do your teaching for Skip Barber?
So we go everywhere. So depending on the weather, so in the winter, we're down in Sebring, and as It gets a little bit warmer, we'll move up to Road Atlanta. They're at Jersey this week, so usually once the summer comes around, we're between Jersey and Lime Rock Park. Those are the two home tracks.
Very nice, very nice. Well, you may have to see me one day because I'm going to get there someday. It's on the list.
Be glad to have you there.
So, how did you get your racing bug? Like, how did you end up in the sport, and how long have you been in the sport? So
I have been in this sport now, I want to say maybe 5 years. It's 2020 now, right? It's weird because this year hasn't, I haven't raced at all, so I don't count it yet. So it's 2020. So I probably got started 6 years ago now. So I'll preface this with, very similar to you guys, I was not into cars at all before any of this. I knew absolutely nothing about cars. For all I knew, everyone was driving toasters around, right? And yeah, and I bought a BMW. It was a 2009 328, and it was a very pretty car, and that's about all I knew about it. And I was I didn't have anything to do one weekend, so I hit up my friend and I said, hey, you guys used to race or do something, right, in college? And he's like, yeah, we do autocross. And I was like, all right, well, I don't have the right car for that, but I want to come try it. I was like, do I need to learn how to drive manual or any of that? Because I don't know how to do that. And he's like, no, just come out. It's really cheap. It's $35, and come out, we'll have fun. So I was like, all right, cool. So that's kind of how I got started. I had tried to learn about my car prior to that, and I was on the forums learning about the motor and all these mods people would do on cars. But autocross was my first time really driving, and that's where it all got started. And people say that autocross is the gateway drug, and it totally is, because 6 years later, here I am on my third race car now, wheel-to-wheel racing. We're going all across the country for all of this. So yeah, it's been quite the journey so far.
So you actually just did your autocross and went like, all right, I'm all in.
Well, I think there's more to it. So there's this story, there's this legend of how we introduced Jennifer to racing. So I taught her how to drive a stick for like an hour.
An hour.
Right? And then I left my car with her so she could drive it for like 3 or 4 days. And then next weekend we went to a race. So perhaps you have a similar story from someplace out in Europe, perhaps, maybe?
I do. So I did a handful of autocrosses, and my BMW was an automatic. It was automatic all-wheel drive. And again, that was about all the car knowledge I had at the time. I went to Germany as just going on vacation. I was visiting a friend, and we were like, let's go all over Germany. I want to see everything. I have only a couple of days. So I'm that kind of type A personality where I have a whole list of things I need to do. And I was like, okay, let's go to the BMW museum, and I want to go check out the Nürburgring. Prior to that, you see it on Top Gear, you see it,
Sure.
here and there on YouTube. I really didn't understand that I was visiting like the most famous track that most car enthusiasts dream of going to ever. Yeah. So at that point, I still did not know how to drive manual, and my friend was like, hey, let's rent a car and drive the Nürburgring. And we rented a Suzuki Swift race car, and I had gotten a couple of, I kind of understood the concept of how to drive manual, so I looked it up on YouTube.
So you
and
knew
I understood
that was better than what I did for Jennifer, YouTube. I mean, you're good.
Yeah, there was a third pedal. I didn't understand why it worked, how it works, but just being the engineer that I am, I looked at it, I analyzed it. I was like, okay, there's a process to this. And so I said, okay, there's just this clutch, and now you have to do something with your right hand, but there's a process, and let me just memorize the process, and I'll go with it.
Mm-hmm.
So it was, I watched YouTube, and I was like, all right, I'm going to do this. And I'll be honest, I was trying to impress the guy that I was with, so I didn't want to admit to him, like, hey, I don't know how to drive manual. We're about to rent this race car and go drive the Nürburgring. So I just didn't say anything. I kind of just followed that process. I just kept my calm, and my first time driving manual was on the Nürburgring in the rain in a Suzuki Swift race car.
Nice. See, Jen?
That's awesome. I'm not the only one.
And I mean, yeah, and similar to how you learned it, sometimes the way you got to just do it is just go head in and just be like, okay, we'll go race, because it's almost easier to drive in a competitive fashion driving manual than it is to just try to focus on everything on the street with other cars and people, everyone texting and driving. I always say that it's safer to drive on a racetrack than it is on the street. No one really believes me unless they're a racer, obviously.
Right.
That was the same logic we used when we in quotes, we prepared Jennifer for the race. But I don't know. She got stuck on the hill.
Well, how did your race go?
It was, there were parts of it that were fine, and then other parts of it that were terrifying. I found that I was focusing more on the shifting than I really was able to focus on what was around me. So, and in Lemons, it's kind of a crapshoot. I mean, it's a free for all. So you really kind of have to pay attention to everything around you, because people are cutting you off and everything. So it was, there were parts where it was, like I said, it was fine, and then other parts that, now thinking, doing it, and everything else that I have to worry about, I'm like, why on earth would I possibly do that? But then it was just like, okay.
But it's cool, because now that you've survived it, you're like, oh wow, that was maybe a lot to deal with that first time, racing. Right. But no, it's a really cool experience to learn how to drive manual and then go racing a couple days later. I mean,
yeah,
that's cool.
Yeah.
It's kind of like learning how to swim laps in a blender, It's
or
really
your parents just pushing you in the pool and say, you can do it.
You'll find a way.
Yeah, the shallow end's over there, just go that way. Yeah. It works. So, Christina, what types of racing have you done? And is there something else on the bucket list that you haven't done? I mean, you started at the Nürburgring, so everything else is kind of downhill, but there's got to be some other stuff that you want to do.
Yeah, there is tons of stuff. I feel like I have been at the track nonstop ever since that first day. And that might be the case. I think a lot of people think that I've quit my day job, but I still show up to work every Monday morning.
With the race hangover?
Oh yeah, it doesn't. Yeah, and it's hard too. Sometimes like we got back from Mid Ohio, and I didn't get to leave the track until 5 or 6 o'clock, and that's an 8-9 hour drive home through the mountains. So it's tough, getting home at 1 or 2 a.m. and unloading the car, returning the trailer, and still being at your desk at 6:30 in the morning. It definitely takes a certain level of dedication.
That's called barely at your desk.
I'm physically there. I've arrived and I am present and
right. And you're glassed over and you're drooling out of the corner of your mouth and you're looking at your computer, but there's nothing going on. You've learned how to sleep with your eyes open.
Oh yeah, those Mondays are tough.
Yeah, everybody's always like, "How tired can you be? All you did was drive." I'm like,
"Oh yeah, it's exhausting."
It is.
I think the towing back and forth, I think, is probably one of the hardest parts. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. So I've done autocross. I've done a couple of drag races, just like in street cars. And this was before I got into like autocross, but. I did HPD. I went through the ranks. I did time trial, and now I'm here in wheel-to-wheel racing. So some things on my bucket list. I would love to do some sort of rally.
That'd be fun.
I think that looks crazy. I would love to have somebody who is totally off their rocker and would be willing to sit shotgun with me and call out turns. I think that'd be awesome.
It has to be somebody who is really fun too.
Oh yeah.
Because if you got a cranky person next to you or just like really high strung, I don't know if that's going to work for so many hours. You really got
to. Yeah, that's a bad environment.
Yeah.
Vic.
What?
She's talking like rally racing. You're talking like Lemons rally. They're very different.
No, I would totally do Lemons rally too, honestly.
Oh, okay.
Well, rally is the cross country thing, right?
Yeah.
Where you're like, there's somebody sitting there looking at a map saying, turn 500 yards 5. And that tells you what type of turn you need to take, not go down.
Yeah, but rally racing would be fun too.
Yes.
Yeah, I think anything in the dirt looks like a lot of fun. I've got a coworker who races late models in the dirt, and that to me is like, it's just such a different world. We talk about the different types of racing, and he's really, really smart. So we talk about car setup, and so even though he races on a totally different surface, a lot of the theories they still apply, and so it's very, very cool. So I'd love to do that someday. Their racing is just totally different, and the budget to race that is also very, very different.
Yes.
And that's something we've talked about, and he keeps saying, you should come over here. You can do a lot more with what you spend in the road racing. So there's a lot of things on the bucket list. I think road racing wise, I would love to go race in Australia.
Very nice.
So I follow a series called V8 Supercars. I guess it's just called Supercars now. But I've been following the series for a couple of years, and it's like NASCAR, but down under. They do it on road courses, which is super cool. And I would love to, I don't know, like drive one of those cars. Like, I think that'd be awesome. But race some of their circuits. The circuits look really cool there. Mountain Panorama looks just wild. And I would love to be able to do that someday.
So we have 2 words. We're trying to get people to come with us. Ice racing.
Oh yes, I will absolutely do that. I'm in. Whenever you guys are going, just give me a call. I'll meet you guys.
I think that would be a blast.
That would be a blast.
So my friend Andrew Zimmerman, he owns Drive Gear Racing. He actually rents cars, and he's brought a couple of customers up there. And so he'll buy the studded tires and everything, and you can just do like an arrive and drive. You don't have to like prep your own car. It's really nice, but it looks super fun. He takes these E30s out there and throws them on studded tires, and like they are just like ripping on the ice just sideways. It looks like a blast.
Seems awesome. I have no idea why I want to do it so much. I hate the cold, but
I do too. But that's like one of those things that it might be worth it.
I think so.
I would brave.
You know what? The cold's really not bad if you're dressed for it.
That's true. That's true.
Do you remember Road Atlanta?
I do remember Road. You know what? Our thing is there's got to be warm driving gloves.
Yeah.
Why are there? We have not found warm driving gloves.
We looked like Captain Hook after the end of our stint. We're just
we're like curled in position around the steering wheel.
Oh my gosh! Was it snowing when you guys were there?
It was 34 degrees and raining.
Oh,
it was the worst kind right there.
That's brutal. Yeah.
Everybody kept saying Hot Atlanta, and I'm like, where is it?
No.
So from a racing perspective, usually a lot of times we'll be talking to teams and they'll have like an area where they're responsible, but you seem to be a one-person army. So is there like a certain part of the team that you have to put together for racing that you feel are your strong points?
So I am a one-girl show when it comes to a race weekend. So that means prepping the car beforehand, any maintenance that I need to do going into the weekend, packing up my car, my trailer, driving to the races, unloading, maintenance, and tuning the car while I'm there, racing the car, and then packing that all up and going home and undoing all of everything that I did before. So I would say I have favorite parts, and
that's a good way to put it.
But when you have to do it all, I don't know, you just got to get through it. So it's people are sometimes shocked. Like I'll go to different races and meet a bunch of people, and people are like, hey, like where's everybody? Where's your family? Or and they're like, well, who loaded your car into your trailer for you? And I'm like, I did. Like, what, you think I call like the race car loading people and they show up at my house and they load my race car?
AAA didn't call you back and say we'll be there in an hour?
Yeah, but no, it often surprises people that, I meet my friends at the track usually, and we come from all over. My car is supported by High Speed Motorsports, which is in Connecticut, and Hugh Stewart, the owner of High Speed, we all go racing together, but we're often coming from different places because, he lives in Connecticut because that's where the shop is, and I'm coming from Virginia, and then we have another friend, Jonathan, who comes from Long Island. So we often just like converge at the track for a few brief days, and then we disperse and we meet up again next month.
That sounds awesome.
So with all the one-man show that you are, what are some of the techniques that you have learned to make your time there most efficient? Preparation.
So I absolutely hate working on the car at the track. And I believe that if you're going to make the most of your weekend, you should not be doing any sort of maintenance at the track. This never holds true. I'm always doing maintenance at the track. Something is going to happen. But try to do as much as you can before you get there. Even if it's something small like, hey, I can change the oil when I get there. That's still going to take up time. What if you forget something? You want to have everything as sorted as possible. And the reason I'm like this also is because for a lot of years I was staff with NASA. And so I was their director for the time trial program. So in addition to my own racing, I had to direct a whole series. So things like a time attack series, we call it time trial, where there's different classes. There's often 30 or 40 cars, and I have to manage every single one of those cars, the drivers. I have to do compliance for them. I have to do a driver's meeting. I have to make sure I have to watch every session that they're on, and I have to do I have to scale them afterwards. So I have to do all of that and put that before my own racing. So
and your own job, right?
Right.
Right.
So I have to do part-time racer.
It's nothing. It's nothing.
I don't see why anything ever breaks.
I know, right? So there's a lot going on, and I think I probably stress myself out a little bit just because I have so much to do and I'm responsible for so much every weekend. But I always urge people, try to take care of your car before you get there. That way you can get to the weekend and relax. You don't have to be going up the S's at VIR and wonder, hey, did I get that last drive shaft bolted? Like, I know we were doing that last night and I said I was going to finish at the track. But that's just like the last thing you want to go through your head when you're trying to set down a good qualifying lap.
Yeah.
So I always urge people to just try to do as much as you can before you get there. I know it's hard, and you're always going to have to work on the car when you're there. But if you can prepare beforehand, it helps so much.
Absolutely. Whenever we do follow our rule that the car is ready 1 week before the race, we'll let you know. It hasn't happened so far, but that's our rule.
So. Always something. So what does your upcoming race schedule look like for 2020? I know a lot of things have been canceled, but
man. So originally I was supposed to go to Road Atlanta in March, and then it got canceled because of COVID. And I'll be honest, I'm very thankful that it was canceled. So I was actually in a really, really bad crash last year, and I shattered several bones in my foot.
We are going to be getting to that.
So all about it.
So I shattered several bones in my foot, and I actually built another car and went racing, and the doctors missed another bone that was shattered in my midfoot, and it wasn't discovered until basically December. So I went back into a cast, and I had just gotten out of the cast probably a week before this Road Atlanta race was supposed to happen. And, racers
that's your therapy.
Yeah. Racers are going to just be the way they are. If that race had gone forth, I would have been there. I would have raced my car. And I'm very, very thankful now looking back at it. Like, I was not ready. My foot was not ready. And I've been really thankful to be able to take this extra time and, work on the physical therapy and heal my foot and get back to a point where, I can go running again. I am clear to race again, which is really nice. And all of the bones this time have healed. But in terms of my race season, so a lot of that got pushed off. A lot of our SCCA races got postponed. We are hoping to be at Roebling Road in Georgia in 2 weeks. So I'll echo your concerns, Vicki, about the COVID. Earlier we discussed, while we can go and the event is going forward at this point, I think we're still going to look at what the situation is there and observe what's happening there for the next 2 weeks before we make that final decision to go. Just because I think safety is first here, and I think everyone just needs to do their part and look out for themselves.
Yeah, I'm curious how the new race season, with the existence of COVID, is how it's going to manifest.
Yeah,
it should be interesting.
Part of it is seeing your friends too, so that kind of interrupts that a bit.
Yeah, it does. I know, especially in the Northeast. The Northeast NASA season, I think there's been 3 races now that have been canceled, and so it's tough. And I feel for the regions, the businesses that they're all feeling the effects of this. And I know people want to get back as soon as they can, but I hope we can do it in a very safe manner.
Absolutely.
Do you have a race philosophy, number one? And how has your race philosophy changed over time?
Race philosophy. I've never thought of it that way. What do you mean by race philosophy?
So if your race car was a flower, what flower would it be? No.
What?
Just kidding. Like how you approach the race, what your strategy might be, what your tips would be to a friend who wants to come in to the sport, stuff like that.
Coming into the sport, I think that you should take whatever car you have. If it's a minivan, if it's a Prius, take that thing, sign up for your autocross. It's $35. It's an extremely low risk, low cost of barrier entry, and just drive it, learn. You're going to have a blast, and you're going to come back for more. And after you do that, it's so easy to get into HPD, time trials. I think the hardest part, convincing other people to show up, in my experience, has been, hey, you got to show up. A lot of people have excuses. They say, oh, my car's not ready, or, oh, I need to add a bigger turbo. Oh, I need bigger tires. I need a wing before I can show up. No, man, just you really just showing up
just
is
drive
the
it.
hardest part. That's right. Just drive it. It's like Nike's Nike slogan. Just come do it. And I saw a kid take his mom's minivan without her knowledge, come to an autocross, run it in an autocross and improve all of his runs, and then quickly leave and go home before mom finds out. So, you know, I think that if a 17-year-old can do that and autocross mom's minivan, I really don't think anybody has any excuse of, you know, oh, my car's not ready, because that kid came out and he rocked that minivan. He came back the next year with his own car. But, you know, just come out. Whatever excuse you have, it's not valid.
Right. And I'm sure that as you level up and your cars change, I mean, that stuff doesn't happen just overnight. It's a gradual progression of your skill level, and then your car level, and then your race series.
Absolutely.
You know, as you feel like you become more competitive, you'll go to a new race series. So, yep. You know, 6 years in and you're driving a fabulous car that you built yourself after the wreck also, which I've seen this car. It looks amazing. You know, to get to that level, it takes a little while, but as you start learning more and learn more about the cars, and then learn about more what you're supposed to do, and you listen to podcasts and you learn from people in the sport, and then you start making friends in the sport, and they also teach you, and in the shops, and they teach you. So, you know, looking at, you know, somebody, you know, Christina Lam, and her level, I'm sure it looks intimidating, but you got to start somewhere. And like she said, autocross is the way to go for starters.
Absolutely. You know, when I first started, I had visited Summit Point, and I saw those racers, and I had never even done an HPD at that point. But I saw the racers in the race group lined up, and, you know, they called 1 minute, and all the engines fired up, and I was like, wow. I was like, those people are nuts. And I always assumed, like, oh, I would probably not do that. Those people look nuts, and that looks like a lot of money, and it looks like they have a lot of knowledge that I don't have. And yet,
spoiler.
You know, and right, and, you know, a couple years later, I've built my own car. I've built several cars now at this point, and you just have to start somewhere. And, you know, at one point, I was that girl who had to learn how to drive manual on YouTube before attempting to impress a guy. And, you know, and back then I was afraid of, I was actually afraid of the air compressor, if you can believe that.
Wow.
That should tell you about how much I knew about cars, the tools that I needed. I was scared of the air compressor because it was loud. And I didn't know if I overinflated my tires by like 2 PSI, is that going to blow up in my face? Like, is that how I lose my face? And is this how I lose an eye? Like, I just didn't know those things. They were scary because I didn't know them. And I think you brought up a really good critical point, is that you make friends, and they show you how to do all these things, right? And they bring you along their adventures, and eventually you get to a point where you teach each other. And that's like the whole motorsports community is just, it's one big family. And that's really what makes it so great.
So we've hinted around about this after the crash series, or after a crash series that you had on Grass Roots Motorsports, and we talked a little bit about it, and we talked about your foot. But so in case somebody hasn't read this, why they're not a subscriber to Grass Roots Motorsports, I personally don't know. But if they haven't read this, you were in, I believe it was an E36 BMW going into a race.
E46.
It was an E46. Okay, I couldn't tell for sure if the first one was.
Yeah, the pictures were really bad.
I only got to see the afterwards. So I think you were at Thompson, which we've all raced at. That was actually Jen's first ever time on a racetrack, and it was a debacle, but it was fun.
I love that track. I love that track. It's a very fun track.
So you were about to start a race, and then the race, I believe, the start got waved off, and you had a second start.
Yep.
Can you kind of just go into the story just a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So this was actually on Sunday. On Saturday, we had really great results. I was on the podium, P3. Hugh won the race, and this was my first time at Thompson, and it was like a total blast. You know, we were racing against all the locals who really knew the track, and so it was good to put the car on the podium, just being my first time there and learning the track that day. So I had a blast, and so I was looking forward to some even better racing on Sunday. The weather was a little bit cooler, and we were going to race a little bit later in the day. So we were gridded up and we came around to take the green, and a couple cars blew the start. I think they just, I don't think we raced until like 5 o'clock that day. So, people were like amped up, but there was a bunch of cars like in like the 8th or 10th row, and they just blew the start.
First timers?
No, they were locals, but I guess people get excited, and sometimes you can't see the green all the way back there, so someone goes and then everyone tries to go.
It's the early race testosterone.
That's
okay.
definitely what it was. But there was a couple cars that blew the start, so we had to filter around, and so we got the green again, and on the first lap, so it was in the oval, so it was actually on the straight section of the oval. My car got dumped into the concrete wall, and
so that was just like the first one, the first couple laps.
First lap.
Oh, the first lap. I never completed that first lap.
Oh.
And it was actually also one of the cars that blew the start.
Oh.
That's not good. Was it coming out of the oval or going in?
It was, we were on the straight section, so we were coming out of it, and it was along the straight section of the oval.
Yeah, where it says Speedway on the left there, and
yeah.
I
think there's a nice mark of my car on that
skid mark. Yeah, that's not good. That's not good.
Yeah, no. So I got smashed into the concrete, just pushed off the straightaway, and my car went head into the concrete, got airborne. It rotated and hit the backside. It was so violent. Like I saw it coming. I knew once the guy hit me, I was like, okay, this is it. Like I'm gonna hit the wall, because my car was sideways and there was no more control. So I braced for it, but I hope no one has to experience anything like that. That was one hell of a hit.
So
Those are
you
unforgiving
mentioned
walls.
you injured your foot. Was it just your foot you injured, or did anything?
Yeah. So when I was hit, so everyone teaches you when your car's out of control, you're about to spin or anything like that, 2 feet in, right? And I think that holds true until you're going to hit something. And in HPD, in classroom, they always teach you, okay, if you're at a point of no return and you're going to hit a tree, a wall, or another car, something, take your hands off the steering wheel, right? Because they don't want you to break your wrists. They don't want you to hold that steering wheel and it snaps one way or the other, because that will easily break your wrist, your palms, anything there. What they often don't tell you is that you should also take those feet off the pedals, because I had my foot on the brake pedal and it was smashed in there when I hit the wall at 100 miles an hour. And my car went from 100 miles an hour to 0 miles an hour. And all of that force went directly through my foot, which is why I had several bones that were shattered.
Wow.
So did they have to do any implants on your feet or
No, luckily they didn't. So I didn't even get back in my car. I didn't even get back to paddock. They took me in the ambulance from the scene of the crash directly to the ER. And so that was my first ambulance ride and my first time in the ER, first time breaking bones. But they actually checked me over really thoroughly at the ER. We had to do an MRI, CT scan. They were checking for internal bleeding. There was just like a ton of tests. I felt like I was there for ages.
Days and days.
Yeah. And, I'm really thankful for Hugh, because they did eventually go green again on the race after they had the ambulance come back, I think. But they did actually have to stop the race because of the incident, because it was so bad. And Hugh was actually the one picking up the pieces, filing the protest for me, and loading up what was left of my car, and taking all of that and then picking me up at the ER and being like, all right, kid, let's go home.
Right.
So what your car was totaled, I assume?
It was absolute trash.
But you did try to save it.
We did.
I don't know what you were thinking, because anybody looking at that, it was parts.
It was shattered into a million pieces, and any pieces that, even if they weren't on the side that were hit, things were shattered, they were bent. Literally everything that was on that car went into the garbage.
So what was the most critical thing on that car that said, all right, there's no saving it? The one most critical, or the maybe three most critical parts that said it's not worth saving?
So when we're looking at saving a car versus junking it, the number one thing we look at is cost. And so literally maybe 12 hours after the incident, I was awake. It was 5 a.m. and I was taking parts off the car. I was like, we have to take this to a body shop. I was like, I already called in sick for work. Like they'll see me tomorrow. And I said, we have to take this to the body shop. And Hugh said, okay, we got to take off the hood. We got to take off the fenders, like anything that can come off so that the body shop can see the condition of the frame. So we were doing that at 6 or 7 in the morning. I could not sleep. And, he helped me, and we dragged it to the body shop, and the body shop took a look at it. They got underneath on the trailer, and they were like, you really did a number on this one. And they've saved a lot of stuff. And Hugh has like some incredible talents when it comes to fixing race cars. He's built, 30, 40 cars in the past couple of years, and his customers have seen a lot of crashes. Just 2 years ago, he actually chopped off the back half of an E46 and replaced it with the shell, with a different shell. So he can really work his magic on some of this stuff. And he said, let's take a look and see if we can save it. The guys at the body shop said, we're going to need a new quarter panel from Germany. It's going to take 3 weeks to get here. That piece alone is $8,000. We have to do all these other things. And, they said, look, we can save the car. It'll be $8,000 to straighten the frame and put on some of those new pieces. And then you're kind of like, okay, we can straighten it, but it was pretty bad. Like the factory seams on the welds were all busted open. The cage itself was actually bent, and that was a really hefty cage. So when there's some serious tubing like that bent, it creates a spring, so like it's a spring-loaded effect in the car. And you can't really guarantee that you're getting rid of all of that. Like you can cut off bars and straighten everything, but by that point, it's almost easier to start new.
Right. So I know that you said you were talking about a protest, and there's rulings within SCCA. How does that process work for somebody who may not be familiar with it? Because, honestly, we're not. So just...
Yeah, so that's a great question. And the first thing you do when you get a race license is, if you do that through NASA or SCCA, you go through comp school, and they give you a test. There's a written test, right, on the GCR, which is the General Competition Rules. And this has rules like just codes of conduct, your classing rules, what you can have on your car, what's legal, what's not. And there's, sportsmanship things, but it also goes through protest section. And one of the ways you can protest another driver, another crew member, is if you believe that person has not followed something that is written in the GCR. And if you think they've broken a rule, then you can file a protest against them. So in this case, I had to have Hugh file a protest for me because I was in the ER, halfway stuck in an MRI machine. But you can also have somebody file it on behalf of you. And so Hugh was able to file a protest against the offending driver in this case. And, he got me on the phone, and I was like, hey, this is what happened. Like, pull my video, pull video from, all the other cars. You can see exactly what happened. So what they do is they then collect all that video. They, go talk to the other driver. They said, give me your video. And then in SCCA, it goes to a stewards meeting, and it's called Stewards of the Meet. SOM board, and all of those stewards look at the video and they say, okay, this is what we think it is. We either, we say this car is at fault, or this car's not at fault, or, this was just a weird incident, and, racing incident, nobody's fault. So it goes to them for a decision. And then once they make a decision, they say, okay, in this case, they said the offending driver is at fault. You shouldn't have come over on the straightaway and pushed the other car off. So, we're gonna issue I think it was a probation for a couple of races. So he wasn't able to race in the same level as us anymore. He had to race regionally, and he got a couple points on his license. And the points on the license is very interesting. And you can think of it as very similar to like when you get pulled over for speeding, you get points on your license, and if you get too many points, you get your license taken away. So same thing here. If you accrue too many points on your license, you could be suspended for a year or asked to sit out several races.
Ooh, that's no fun.
Oh.
So don't drive like a word we're not going to say on a podcast. Very nice. So
we're not going to go into who's.
No. You knew your car was pretty much a write-off. I think you actually took it to the crusher from some of the pictures I saw.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a bummer, but
a little tear in her eye.
I'm sure.
Actually, so the guy at the junkyard put on a really good show. The whole video of it is on my YouTube. But the guy, like, he sees me recording, so he puts on a show and just demolishes the shell. It was actually pretty good.
Oh, there you go.
It was a good send-off.
At least we had a little bit of fun there. So
yeah.
So I believe you had a goal coming out of this with your hobbling on your foot, and you had to go basically start from scratch. Is that?
Yeah. So about 3 days after the crash, after talking to the body shop, we said, okay, we're gonna start fresh. And I'll say, like, this is all the credit here goes to Hugh. He owns this shop. He runs it, and it's always packed. And at this point, the shop was just full of cars. He already had a full schedule. We're in the middle of summer. There are race cars that need service. There are HPD cars that are getting turned into race cars. And he turns to me. He is like, "Oh, well, we can build a new car for the runoffs." And I was just kind of like, "Okay, like we can do that." And I think I didn't really maybe think about that, and I didn't consider the fact that maybe my foot's broken and I'm on crutches and in a cast. But he just said it so matter-of-factly. I was like, okay, yeah, like let's go ahead and do that, because this car meant a lot to me. And I think any racer who has a car or supports a car, they have some sort of attachment to this. And that car that got smashed was it was like maybe a year and a half, almost 2 years in the making. That was a real big dream of mine that I really worked towards. And I only had that car for 10 weeks before I had to write that off.
Wow.
Oof.
Yeah.
So how did you come about finding your next shell?
So I was on Craigslist. I looked at a couple of shells. A lot of people were just wasting my time. Some guy tried to sell me a car as is. He's like, "Oh, everything's good, but I haven't turned it on in like 6 years." I was like, "Okay, well then I can only give you like $3,000 because I really only want the shell." He's like, no, the motor's good. And I don't know, I think he understood there was like some sort of urgency, and then he tried to get more money after we agreed on some price. But I actually had one of my friends in my network pinged me and said, "Hey, there's a shell sitting in North Carolina. It's been sitting at the shop, and they meant to do a project with it, but they're out of time, and they would sell it for pretty cheap if you want it." So I hit them up and I texted them, and about an hour later I PayPal'd them the money and said, "Okay, I'm going to make arrangements to get this picked up." So that was actually pretty quick. Once I found the right car and I knew it was the one. And then Hugh took. So I was on a work trip, and not in the area. So Hugh, I also couldn't drive at this point, but Hugh took a like 10 or 15-hour trip from Connecticut down to VIR, picked the shell up from VIR, and then brought it back to Connecticut. Wow. And
that's a good guy.
I know. Because that's a long drive, and that's the new shell, and then we got cracking on it.
So do you have any tips and tricks to finding and minimizing cost and time?
There is no such thing, right?
So you can get 2 of the 3. You can get quality, cost, or
that's
time.
Right. That's right.
You can't get all 3.
So I'll say I am one person who really, really appreciates my sleep. And I am one of those people who tries to get 8 hours every night. And if that means I need to go to sleep at 9 o'clock one night, that's totally fine. I have no problem telling my friends, "All right, guys, like, you guys got to get out of here. I'm going to bed." So I love my sleep. And once this crash happened, I realized, like you said, you can only pick 2 of the 3. I decided to forego sleep because I needed that extra time to build this new car and make this deadline. And
Christina evolved.
Yes.
There was a whole different Christina.
I mean,
Dark
I look
Christina.
Back, it was, yeah, I get cranky if I don't get enough sleep too, but I said, if so many people are going to try to help us make this car happen, I was like, what's a little less sleep? And so I got used to, 3 or 4 hours a night. But now that's over. now that's over, I'm back to the 8 hours.
So after the crash, did your approach change at all? Like, was there any defining moment after that you looked at everything differently, or?
I don't think so. Like, to be honest, I just kind of got up and dusted myself off and said, okay, we just gotta do this
Get
again.
back on
like
the pony.
we just did this and we'll do it again.
It was
Definitely
just
not.
we got stuff to do.
Did you ever watch Predator? So
yes. Jesse
gets shot and he goes, "Oh, you're bleeding," and he's like, "I ain't got time to bleed." So that was you.
Yes, it's certainly what it felt like.
So why did you choose the E46 again?
So it's a great platform. I loved my first one, and I thought it was the best thing ever. I have a history in BMWs. So I started in the E90, but then I first raced an E30, and then I built my E36, and then eventually the E46. So I have raced almost all of the BMWs out there, and I loved the platform. Like last year when we first got it out, my very first event was actually a CCA majors race, and I got in the car and I felt right at home. And I had to start last because I blew the sound limit, but I got a 4th place finish for my first weekend in the car and starting from the back of the pack. So it just feels like home. And it was also a platform that I was very familiar with. So it was something that I had just done, and it was going to be easy for me to do the same thing all over again.
What about the areas or issues of concern with the BMW that you look for?
Oh, that's a great question. And I know the E46s have a lot of things that they're worried about. And the first is the subframe. And if you're buying an E46, the first thing you're going to ask the seller is, hey, did you reinforce the subframe? So a lot of people don't really understand, but the subframe itself is extremely strong on the E46. It's actually the floor where the subframe attaches is a weak point. And so it's really common to take like AKG Motorsport reinforcement plates and weld them in. But it's also a very expensive job because you have to take that entire rear end off, and a lot of owners are just not willing to dump that much money into a car that might be 10 or 15 years old at this point. So that's often something that people will look at when buying an E46 M3. It really wasn't an area of concern for me as long as the floor wasn't falling apart. Like minor cracks are to be expected, but because I was going to take the whole car apart anyways, it didn't matter to me. And so as long as it was in decently good shape, I could repair any cracks and put the AKG reinforcement plates in and call it a day. Even if it was done by somebody else, I would probably have gone through and checked it over anyways. So it almost made my job easier just having the ability to do all of that work. It didn't really matter to me as much when it came to buying that car. Another weak point in the E46 is the rod bearings in the motor. And again, for me, this didn't really matter because I know how to change the rod bearings. So if anything, it's almost easier when people haven't done the maintenance because I can just use as a negotiation point and say, hey, you haven't done this, $5,000 maintenance item. Let's talk about price a little bit. Because even if somebody had done it, a dealership had done the recall, it's something I would have opened up anyways and redone as preventative maintenance.
Great.
We're thinking about our right now.
Oh yeah.
Well, we just bought a E46 M3 and sitting in the driveway with no plates and title because I can't get there with COVID. But it's there. One of the things I was thinking about is since you were going to basically be making it into a race car and you were only looking for a shell, why did you choose to go with the M version and not just the 328s, like 330 version?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there are subtle differences with the M3 and non-M3 shells. And actually in the series that I race in the rule book, it actually specifies that I have to race an M3 chassis. Ironically, the guy who tanked me into the wall was not racing, his shell was actually not an M3. He had done some sort of swap with the motor. So his car was actually not even legal for our class.
That's awesome.
But I know.
It gets deeper and deeper.
I know. But so at the time, the M3 was it said on the SCCA line item, you have to race an M3 chassis. And they have since updated that I think in last month's update, they did update and say, you can now race a wagon if you want. I don't think that's a great idea, but hey, who am I to judge, right? So there are a couple differences, and the big one is going to be the fender arches. So the M3, you know, if you go look at the car in your driveway, it's got these nice arches, and you're going to fit a nice 275 tire on the back of that, and even the fronts, they're pretty meaty up front compared to a non-M chassis.
275.
Oh yeah. So they come stock much wider than a non-M chassis. The other differences are going to be in your subframe. You have a different diff. So the M3 has a much beefier diff. It's a larger diff than the non-Ms. There are a couple of maybe advantages there where if you were to use a non-M diff, you could save a lot of weight. That said, we push a lot of power. We put a really big Hoosier tire on there. We want that big diff so that it's, you know, we have all that fluid capacity and so that it can cool itself. So we keep all the M3 bits because there's a reason a bunch of BMW Motorsports engineers designed it that way. I'm not going to pretend like I'm smarter than any of them. So I will use what they designed and were paid very well to design. So those are probably the two big items when it comes to an E46 M3 versus a non-M3 chassis. And one of the big things that's really special about the high-speed motorsports cars is that we take those already wide M3 fenders and we make them even bigger. And we do that with all of your stock stuff. So we take that front fender and we run that through an English wheel to thin out that metal, so that we can fit a 295 Hoosier underneath the front and rear.
That's some big meat there. Okay, cool.
It is. It's great.
So you have a broken foot. You have essentially a broken and crushed race car, and you are going to go to the SCCA runoffs and VIR, and I think you had less than 60 days. Obviously, you're smoking crack, but was anything salvageable from the earlier car, or was it pretty much toast?
Oh, I took the roof off. The roof actually made it.
Wow.
So,
I guess there's something.
It's sitting in her office at work.
So the roof is actually, it's a carbon fiber roof, and you have to drill out all the spot welds on the stock roof to remove the sunroof and the aluminum roof, and it's a lot of weight. You save like 50 pounds by putting a carbon fiber roof on there, and it's a extremely tedious process. I have a YouTube video of it on my channel where I did the first roof, and I think there's like some 250 spot welds that you have to slowly and very carefully drill out, and then you take an air chisel to it and pop it off. But yeah, the roof was the one thing I was able to salvage and put right back onto the new car. I did take wiring out. There was damage to the wiring. There was damage to literally everything that we took off. I was hoping that we could have saved more than we did. And so we ended up having to take all of the parts off just to see what we could salvage, and just about all of it went into the trash.
How much did you get for it?
I think like $34 is what the junkyard gave me.
Wow.
So
your car was reduced to $34.
That's right.
That's not good.
I'm sorry. I seriously, my heart hurts.
It does. I mean, so you have a shell. You're going to need a cage. You're going to need probably paint. You're going to need a new engine. You're going to be somewhat impacted with a broken foot that you didn't know was broken more than you knew. I just sat there and I kept reading these articles going, there is no way this is going to happen. But, you're a trooper. I know it did happen. I still can't believe it happened, but it did. So you had to have a lot of help. I mean, we had a ton of help. We had friends, sponsors, people I didn't even know reach out and say, hey, we've been following your racing for such a long time. We loved all of your results from this year, and what can we do to help you make this race? And I don't think I realized during that period what we were up against. I think Hugh and I just said, okay, we're going to build a car. We're very matter of fact people, so we said, okay, we're going to build a car, and that was it. That was now the truth, that we were going to build a car and we were going to make it to the runoffs. There was no doubt in my mind that we were going to make it. It was just simply, we had stated it, and now we were going to make it happen.
looking back at it, we were both totally nuts. I'm not sure how we made it through that, but I do have to thank every single company, brand out there, and all of our friends who were willing to come out and help us. Like you said, it was a really tall order. You know, we were starting from a bare bones shell.
Yeah. And you got it done like in plenty of time to spare, right?
We were still putting final touches on the car about 5 minutes before I took it on track at VIR.
No problem. So it was fully dialed in and race proven, and you were able to make your modifications you needed.
Right.
Yeah, almost.
Were you nervous at all going back out again for the first time after?
That's great, and that's something that a lot of people ask me. They say, do you have PTSD from what happened? Like, were you worried at all? And I actually dealt with a lot of PTSD after that incident, and I actually couldn't drive for a while, not just because because of the foot. I broke my right foot, so I couldn't drive, but I actually dealt with a lot of PTSD up until the point the car was actually finally rebuilt. And it would just be simple things like driving on the street, and like as race car drivers, you can kind of tell, and you drive defensively, who else is on the road and who's texting and driving, who's not really paying attention. And as a race car driver, you can take all that in and know who's who, what everyone's doing. And I would see that, but then, somebody who's clearly texting and driving makes like a weird move. And normally it wouldn't bother me because I would already say, okay, like I know they're texting and driving. These are all the possibilities of what they could do. But I would just see flashbacks like, okay, now that person's just going to come over and keep coming over and keep pushing my car until I go off the other end of the bridge. And so it made my 2-mile commute to work brutal. Like I would just see it over and over. And so, yeah, that kind of scared me during that time. And I was like, oh, like, what happens if I get back on track and things aren't the same? Because I've heard people where they're in really, really bad crashes like this, and they say, yeah, it was just never the same after that. And, I never went back. So I did worry about that. That's something I don't think I ever really talked about, because I don't know, I didn't want it to be like a sign of weakness. So I'd never talked about it, and I was like, okay, like, maybe it'll go away. And luckily once I got back in the car, I got back in that driver's seat, I strapped in, all of that just kind of faded away. It was like, okay, I'm in a car that, my friends and I built together, and it's safe, it's fast, it has all the right parts. I said, I know this track, and all of that melted away. And I think that was the last time I thought about it. It was just, once I got back in the car, everything was fine. It was like I was back at home.
But then you get back in your daily driver, and
I still tell everybody, like, driving on the street, driving to work, that's the most dangerous point in your life, where you're driving on the street. That stuff scares me.
So before we go on to the other questions, I just want to touch on the PSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. PTSD.
Mm-hmm.
So how did you personally work through that? I mean, did you have to do either breathing exercises, or did you just have, tense all the way to work, or did you have to talk to yourself? Did you speak to anybody?
So I honestly wish I had taken the time, and I think the right thing would have been to talk to somebody about that. I was very short on time, so I did not. And I don't recommend that. I think if anybody has that kind of experience, and they're experiencing that kind of stress, I really do think that you should go talk to somebody, because that's what a professional is for. I was short on time. I was taking overnight trains back and forth to Connecticut to use that travel time as my sleep time. I was working long hours at work. I was spending 3 days at home and 4 days at the shop. And so it wasn't easy for me to take time outside of that and say, okay, let me go talk to somebody. So as I started to drive more and more, I would do this weird thing where I would have to practice driving next to a car again. And it made me so nervous. And it's something as simple as, a car is clearly on cruise control, the driver's not paying attention, and I just need to drive next to it for 2 or 3 seconds. And that was a really hard thing for me to do at first, because I was like, here, like, it was just the accident all over again. It's like, okay, this guy is just not going to know what he's doing. He's going to just move over and keep moving over. And it was really stressful. So I would actually practice driving next to a car, and the next time I'd be like, okay, I'll drive next to it for a little bit longer. That's really not a great way to probably work through it, but that's how I had to work through it, which was just to work through it, and unfortunately just build trust in, I guess, unaware drivers.
So your race went well then when you did race the
Yes.
first time? So
yes.
yeah, so everything you said just kind of melted away, or
yeah,
no anxiety?
Yeah, the first time I was in the brand new car was actually qualifying at the SCCA runoffs at VIR. So no testing, none of that, just again straight into qualifying. And we got 3 chances at qualifying, so I got 3 times in the car before the race. And of course, the race day comes around and it pours. So, like, of all things, can we just have like a dry race, like one less thing to worry about? So I'm sitting on grid and it's pouring. I have my Hoosier H2Os on, so I'm like, okay, like I have the good tires, and I was like, they're brand new, and we were going up to take the green, and you couldn't see a thing. All the cars had rooster tails. My windshield was fogged, and I couldn't even see the taillights of the cars in front of me. And I was like, okay. I was like, I hear engines in front. So I was like, I guess we've gotten, like, we're close enough to the green. But when you get to the SCCA runoffs, you're not just racing any like Joe Schmo who is going to show up with a race car, right? You're racing like the best of the best in the country. You're racing people who you're racing pro racers who are bringing their personal race cars to the runoffs to race, and you get to compete against the best. And so I'll be honest, I held my breath from when we took the green through turn 1, and none of us went off. Nobody hit anybody. And then that's when I think I had like my final piece of, okay, like we are racing against some really good people. We're not racing against, some idiots out there. We're all here for a reason. And I think that's when I was able to put all that to peace and, just get back to focusing on the race.
Everybody starts becoming predictable, more
Yes.
so.
Yes. Or at least, who's better than, others, and you can watch out for them.
Mm-hmm.
It was like cold trickle at Daytona.
Yes. That's right.
Fun.
That's right. So did you have any issues with your injury? Because as you were saying that you found out about the second bone in December. So did that affect your racing when you were out there?
So it was not easy. So originally when I went to the ER, they said, okay, you got to be in a cast for the next 6 to 7 weeks. And then they said, you can take it off and you can wear like a stiff-soled shoe. And I was like, okay, cool. But even getting out of that cast, everything was still really hard. Everything was like, I was still very slow. And in part was because I still had a broken bone. And so I would be changing wheels and tires, and, our setup is really heavy. We have 10.5-inch wide wheels and 295 Hoosiers on them. So they're big, they're heavy. And, I remember picking up a tire once, and I was like, my foot doesn't feel so great. But, in the back of my mind, I was like, okay, well, my foot's fine. It's healed, so I'll be okay. The one moment at the runoffs where it did kind of give me a pause was on my third qualifying day. And I was on a flyer. Like, my aim was like green. It was like, okay, you're on a personal best. And I was like, okay, this is the one. This is my flying lap for the runoffs. I was like, let's get this done. And I went for the brake pedal it was in the back straight at VIR. And so our cars are at like 150 miles an hour. And I went for that brake pedal, and there was this lightning pain that went through my foot. And I literally was like, I think I just re-broke my foot. And little did I know, like I was actually aggravating that broken bone. But at the same time, I was like, okay, well, the aim says that I'm ahead, so like let's just keep going. I'm almost over the lap. So I got my good lap in, but it did kind of bother me that at that last qualifying where I was like, my foot is not feeling so great anymore. So I kind of had that in the back of my head, but I was at the same time I was like, I trust the doctors. Like, I guess it's all sorted out. I just give it some rest after the runoffs.
Right. You're on mute. You're on mute. You're on mute.
Sorry. So what's it like being a female in a male-dominated sport? And like, have you ever been intimidated? Are you still intimidated, or is it just not an issue?
So at this point, I I am totally not intimidated at all about anything. I think that building this car has got me to a point where I look at anything and I'm like, well, we built this car in under 60 days and we raced it and we did pretty well. So whatever you think you can throw at me, like, I can take you. So to answer your question, yes, there have definitely been times where people have tried to intimidate me or bully me because of my gender or even my ethnicity. And I think it's unfortunate, and I think it's starting to change. There are definitely a lot more women and a lot more women of color who are starting to drive, and there's just been such a change and an increase over the years. When I started, I was one of the only girls in the paddock. And, you know, to think about that, it was only maybe 6 years ago. It really wasn't all that long ago. And, you know, now it was like, oh, if there's a woman there, it's like, oh, you're just the wife of a racer. And I still get mistaken. You know, Hugh and I will go register, and they'll take his credentials, and then they'll just automatically hand me a crew badge. I'm like, no, I'm also racing. But, you know, it doesn't really happen all that often anymore. I think there's more and more women out there, and I think it's a really great thing to see. Just more people in general just participate in the sport. And I think with numbers, it'll become, you know, what should be normal, which is the equality that we all expect, you know, in life. So I think it's a really great thing.
I love that.
Yeah.
I just like having girls in the racing because, you know, in general, you're much prettier than we are. So
exactly. And I mean, that's
What?
when we stand on top of the podium, we do look better. I'll say that.
Exactly. And you're just as fast, and you can drive just as well. And, you know, I don't have a problem with it. It's half our team is female. So
That is true. Half of our
Perfect.
team is female. So we're now going to enter into the chapter of the Fast and Furious Storytime questions.
Okay.
These are just they're relatively fast. We get to know who you are personally. Okay.
All right, let's do it.
It's very fun. Okay, Jennifer.
So the first question is, what was your first car, and what was the worst car you ever had?
So my first car. Well, the first car that was going to be mine, and this is actually a very embarrassing story.
We love those.
We could top it, I'm sure.
So my dad had an E39, and by the time I was in college, he said, you know, this is now like the family's older car. My mom had a newer car at the point, so he said, you know, instead of buying you a new car, we'll give you the E39. And that's a pretty nice car for any college kid to get. It's an older 5 Series. It was very nice, and I learned how to drive on that, which was very cool. And so it was like kind of transitioning to being mine, because I was like driving it for my internship. My dad was retired, and he was like, whatever, I don't care anyways. But before it became mine, one summer, I will admit that I was texting and driving one day, and I totaled it by rear-ending a car in front of me. And because it was an older car, it really wasn't that much damage. I didn't know anything about cars back then. You know, today I'd be like, oh, I'll put a new bumper and a new hood on it and a new radiator, and it'll be good to go.
Dad won't even know.
Right. Right. But I will admit, that was the last time I ever texted and drove. I definitely learned my lesson from that. But yes, that was going to be my first car, and then I totaled it by texting and driving. So I hope that people do listen to, like, you know, those ads. They're like, don't text and drive. And every time I hear them, I'm like, yes, don't text and drive.
Shut up already. I know.
Yes. So unfortunately, I killed my first car in a fender bender.
Did you at least finish the first lap?
It wasn't a race.
From college? No, from college and back? From college and back, or did you?
Yeah, this was senior year in college.
Okay, all right.
So what is the car from your family that sticks out in your mind? Like from your childhood, or like as you were older? Or?
Probably the E39, maybe because I had a hand in its death. But so that was
demise
from start to finish.
Cradle to grave.
Yeah, like my dad had a Volvo before that, and I can't remember what he had before that. now he doesn't have a car. He does his stock market stuff at home, and he doesn't go out much. So him and my mom share a car now. But I think that E39 is what got me started into BMWs. Like I don't think my dad was a particular like BMW fanatic. I think he just liked the value of the car at the time compared to its competitors. But I really took to that car. Like when I was able to start driving that for my internship, I was like, oh, like I totally get this, like, you know, why people love BMWs. And, you know, as a college kid, you're like, wow, like, you know, driving a BMW is kind of sweet, right? You're driving dad's BMW. But I think that's what got me started, and that's what eventually led me to buy my E90 several years later and eventually get the E36 M3 and go down this BMW route.
Nice. All right. What is the one thing that no one knows about you that would surprise them? I would say majority of people out there.
She's a race car.
Besides being a race car driver.
So I am very, very bad at math. And this is
And you're an engineer?
So yes, I am very bad at math. I am an engineer, and, you know, just stereotypes out there, you know, that people look at me and they're like, oh, she must be very good at math, and she must be a terrible driver. So that is something that always surprises me, or surprises other people. And Hugh, who's my coach, makes fun of me all the time because he'll say something in terms of like numbers, like I need to work in whole numbers because like I'm just not good at
She's got her
fractions.
finger in the air and she's marking it down, trying to do all of her math on the imaginary board.
Yeah, like I can't wait until we all convert to metric because I just can't work with fractions. So Hugh makes fun of me all the time for it, and he'll give me math to do, like race car stuff to do in fractions, like on purpose, and it'll just fluster me. So it's fun.
And they'll go and get a cup of coffee, come back, and you're still working it out.
Yeah.
So do you prefer automatic or manual?
So I'm at a point in my life now where I think that each has its own place. And for many years, I always said, you know, manual's the way to go. Once I learned how to drive manual, I was like, everyone needs to drive manual. I think it's incredibly important to know how to drive manual. I think that if you guys have, it is. So I'll say that. I'll say if you guys have, you know, kids who are learning how to drive, teach them how to drive manual. Give them a very basic manual car. That is one hand less that you can hold a cell phone and text, and it also gives you a better sense of control of the car. That said, like I totally think that, you know, automatic cars have their place, and I totally get it. If you have a long commute, there's just something nice about, you know, not having to deal with a clutch in traffic. I do like the DCT cars. So it's like some of the later BMWs have the dual clutch transmission. They're not really like an automatic. They're not really manual, but there is no clutch, and I think one of those as a future race car might be really cool.
Could be fun.
Who's your favorite driver?
So I would say I have two favorite drivers. Catherine Legg, just all the racing that she has done, I really like. So I didn't get into racing late. So when I learned about her, she was driving the Delta Wing, which I thought was the coolest thing out there. And, you know, I love that she's racing the Lamborghini this year. I follow her racing very closely. I think she is the real deal when it comes to racing drivers. Another female I look up to is Simona Di Silvestro. She raced in V8 supercars for several years, and before that she did IndyCar. Now she's a factory Porsche driver, and I just think that's so cool. I think, you know, for many people, myself included, that's like the ultimate dream to get picked up by a manufacturer like that.
That would be awesome.
So what's the car that got away?
The car that got away. I'll say, you know, these days my focus is on race cars, but the street car that got away was right as I was getting into the autocross, the HPD. I was looking at getting a Cayman S as a street car. And I still believe that is the car that got away, because when I was looking at them, I wanted, like, you know, the 2009 and up. But when I was looking at them, I was looking at the prices, and I was like, I think those prices are gonna hold pretty firm over the next couple of years. And you know, sure enough, 6 years later, they have held very firm, and they haven't budged since the day I looked at them. And so I keep saying like, man, if I bought that 6 years ago, that would have been a good buy. I still think they're going to hold their value. They're great cars. And, maybe I'll get the chance to have one someday, or maybe even better, I'll get to race one on track.
Ooh, that'd be fun.
Would be fun. So front wheel, rear wheel, or four wheel driver, doesn't really matter.
It doesn't matter. I will race it all. I am a rear wheel drive purist. I with the BMWs, it's just what I learned and what's proper, right? But I think that front wheel drive has come really far in the past couple of years, especially as street cars. Like I have a Golf GTI as a street car, and they all have like these e-diffs, and they have this braking system that'll essentially act as a diff, and the technology has come so far in the past couple of years that it really mimics a rear-wheel drive car very, very well.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't harbor that same grudge against front-wheel drive cars that many race car drivers do. I think if it has four wheels, you should absolutely go race it and have a blast with it.
That's awesome. So what's the fastest you've ever driven in what car and what track?
If it was a track.
If it was a track.
If it wasn't a track, we don't need to say where.
Then it was in Mexico. So the fastest I've gone would definitely be in my current car. So the second E46 that we built is faster than the old one. So that's really exciting. We went to VIR with both cars. I took the first car to VIR for Hyperfest, and we compared the data that we got there to the data we got at the runoffs. And new car is faster. I think we hit 152 on the back straight, which is pretty fast. It's not the fastest I've gone. I have ridden with students at VIR, and there was a Viper ACR that I rode in.
Wow. And
we hit 178 or something ridiculous. And I was like, wow, I never need to go this fast ever again.
That's a lot of car.
I can't even imagine right now. I really can't. All right, so you're on a desert island. The top 5 cars and course on the island is a track.
It's a great island.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds like a good island.
It is.
Do I get my pick of like my friends too?
Sure.
Any car.
It's only desert island. It didn't say it was deserted.
It's a dirt track.
The dirt track.
Could be a dirt track.
Could be. It
Could be.
any
It's your island. You know.
Your island.
Oh, there's so many possibilities. I would totally build like a track within the track.
Not that Viper.
Probably not that Viper. That's tough. At this point, I think I would love to, just one would be my car for sure. I always say, I'm never going to sell this car. I always say that about whatever car I have. And I'm sure someday, whatever day that is will come, and I will have to, let this car go for the next opportunity. I would definitely bring my car. I would love to drive one of like the newer Corvettes that's in my class, because we race against these guys and they have a very different rule set for their cars. And so they don't have aero, but they have so much power and they have so much tire. So I would love to have a competing T1 Corvette on my island.
C7?
The C6 seems to do really well.
C6, okay.
Yeah. But speaking of C7, so there's a couple of those in the GT2 class. I love watching the GT2 class compete because it's often cars that jump over from Trans Am. I would love to have one of those. One of my friends, David Pinterick, has a Cadillac, which he races in both GT. I think he races in GT1 and also in Trans Am. That will definitely go probably above 178 miles an hour at VIR, but I would totally race one. It looks like a total blast.
So from the mid-50s Cadillac with the big wings on the back, or?
No, it's a newer one. It's a newer one.
Just having fun. I'd hate to see one of those go with 150. Woo.
Oh, man. I don't know. I feel like you need a practical car. So maybe like a Miata.
Nope. Very nice. You think of Miata as a practical car. Okay. This racing bike hasn't bitten you at all.
Yeah, you can't go wrong with Miata. They're easy to work on, and you get a bunch of them, make a spec series, right?
Exactly. For your friends that come to the island.
Right. See, last car would have to be a V8 supercar. I love the sequential transmission in them, and just the raw amount of power when they have their standing starts. I think those cars are really, really awesome.
So what would be your dream car for a race? Or if you were going to do another build, what would your dream car be?
E46.
Another one?
So, to be honest, I think if dreams were to come true, I don't think I would build another car. So I have my eye on a couple of pro racing series, and that's really the next step in my motorsports career. And in a lot of these series, you don't build your own car to compete anymore. You go buy a car from a manufacturer. So, I love the TCR cars, and I think one of those would be really cool. Volkswagen just stopped their program, but they had some TCR GTIs. Honda has a Civic Type R TCR car. They have a couple of cars that compete in pro racing series across the world. So my dream would be to have a TCR car and not only be able to race that in a pro series here, but make that translate into something maybe in Europe or even in Australia.
Nice.
So if you can have and only drive a car or race a car from any decade, what decade would you choose?
All the other decades are off limits. You can only choose any cars that you want, but you can only choose from one decade.
It's tough because I love watching some of the old Trans Am races, and I think they had some crazy fields back in the day. So I love the idea of maybe something in the 80s. At the same time, I think racing has evolved so much, and there's so many opportunities and so much more manufacturer involvement now that you can't go wrong with getting involved in racing today. I think that there are a ton more opportunities today than there were maybe 30 years ago, and there's more eyes on the series. There's more outlets for you to create content for those manufacturers, that series. So there's no day like today.
Awesome.
Today is going to be your day.
All right. Do I get to go? Because you hate this question. I know they hate this question, so I get stuck with this one. So, Jeremy, Hammond, May, Chris, Matt, other.
Clarkson.
All right, very well. Some of the most fun is when people are sitting there and go, "Who?" That's always
oh no, you can't.
All right.
I do love Top Gear because it's a car show, but if you're not a car nerd, you can still watch it. It's a comedy show, and it's so good. They do a great job.
They do a great job. They really do.
We got Vicky in the cars a little bit.
Yeah.
So where would your ultimate road trip be from and to, and in what car?
Oh man.
This is your
ultimate
rally.
Road trip.
This is your rally.
Yeah. Ooh. I would want a comfortable car, like a really comfortable car, but I guess it's also got to be fast. Because there's no point in doing it slow. I feel like if I were to do a road trip, I love the functionality of the hot hatch that I have, and I do love the look of the new Civic Type Rs. I know their look is a little controversial to some people, but I think for me, a tiny little hot hatch like that with a ton of power in a stick shift would be my ultimate road trip car. And so when I take road trips, I don't really have a destination. Like, I would love to take a big loop around the United States and go along the top part out to California, and maybe take the Civic on track at Sonoma and go to Laguna, and then do a bunch of tracks on the way home.
Lap of America, right? One lap.
Yeah. I think that would be a ton of fun. And there are so many stock cars that come straight from manufacturer these days that would just be a ton of fun to do them in, and are just super practical.
So how about movie or a favorite car from a movie?
Ooh.
She probably doesn't have much time for movies.
So this is a funny, it's a Fast and Furious reference. So I actually haven't watched too many of the Fast and Furious movies. The first one I did watch was Tokyo Drift, And that is where, like, I was in high school at the time, I think, when it came out. And that's when I had my heart set on the fact that I wanted a 350Z drift car. And I didn't know anything about cars at the time, but I just thought it was the coolest thing. And that has always stuck with me throughout the years, especially now that sometimes I look at, okay, I'll be honest, I look at Craigslist a lot, and there are a lot of cheap 350Zs that would be easy to turn into a drift car. There's so many kits out there for, those crazy angle camber kits that they have. Someday I just want to do it. And, maybe that'll be the next part of my journey.
That'd be awesome.
What car would you love to switch into that you're currently racing? Like if you were at the track, and do you have a friend or someone that
Friend of me
regularly shows up that you would love to drive their car?
I would love to drive any of the Phoenix-built Mustangs or Corvettes. They are a competing shop that has a heavy presence in the touring classes. So they compete in all sorts of classes in SCCA, and they do really, really well. They have beautifully built cars, and we are always battling with them to get on the podium. Their cars are immaculate. I would love to get behind the wheel of one of their cars, or trade with one of their customers one weekend, maybe.
There you go.
Very nice. All right, what car would you like to have wiped from history?
I'm one of those people who doesn't have regrets, and I think that no matter your experience or what you think about anything, I think everything had its purpose. So I don't particularly harbor any sort of grudge against any car. I think everything had its purpose, and if that purpose was for everyone to hate it and learn from it and to not build more of them, then I think that it has done its job.
That was a non-answer.
What is your favorite track so far?
My favorite track? Oh, that's tough.
You can have a top three if you like.
All right, top three. I think first would be Sebring. Sebring was the place where I did my first national championship, and I got a third place there. So it was really exciting for me to take my car there my first year of racing and be on the podium for a national championship. My second would probably be Thompson, even though the first and last time I went there did not end very well. I think it's a phenomenal track. Everyone complains that's so technical, but that is how I drive. And we did really well there Saturday, and that kind of track just kind of suits me. So even though I rode off car there, it's not the track's fault, and I do really like it, and I do want to go back.
Okay. All right.
And then I think my third track would be, I don't know, I would probably say Jersey. Thunderbolt is one of
Thunderbolt.
Thunderbolt, yeah. That's just one of my favorites. We do a lot of testing there, and so it's 3 hours from home. It's easy to get to, and we do a lot of testing there. So, we spend a lot of time there. It's a great place. It's a great track.
It is. We like Thunderbolt.
We do like Thunderbolt. That was my first track, and I think there's always a little in my heart for that one.
Absolutely.
So, what are you working on during the season now that it's canceled?
So far, not always.
Yeah. What do you think you've been working on? How are things going? You resting your foot?
I have been resting my foot nonstop since the runoffs happened. I actually have not touched my car since that day. I parked it, and that's about it. It is still sitting on its Hoosier H2Os. I just the idea of having to swap the tires gives me a little bit of stress because of the weight I had to put on my foot. So I just kind of left it. The car is brand new. It's good to go. I wish I had the budget to do a couple of upgrades this winter, but honestly, I'm just really thankful to have a race car at all at this point, considering what happened last year. So I'm really thankful to have the car, and it's ready to go. It's a brand new car. We've tested it, and so we're ready to go to Roebling.
Are there any sponsors or supporters you wanted to say thanks to or shout outs to for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So first and foremost, Hugh Stewart, owner of High Speed Motorsports, and he's supported my racing for a couple of years now. And when I originally went to him to have my first car built, I was like, man, there's something special about this guy. Like he really wants all of his customers to succeed. And I think it's something that's really hard to find in people, especially like in a business. Some people just want to push you parts and make a lot of money off you, but there's something really special about him. He always wants to help everybody. If it's his competitor, his customer, anybody, he just wants to have everybody have a great time and be the best that they can be on track. And he is the reason that I picked myself back up, and he gave up his summer to help me rebuild this car so that we can go racing this year. So huge shout out to Hugh and High Speed Motorsports for all of the work and hours that got put in last year, and all the hours that we put in at the track. Hugh's awesome. Tony from TC Design. So Tony took a red-eye flight out after the crash, and he actually built the cage in my new car in under 2 days.
Wow.
Yeah, that was really special. And I hadn't met Tony at this point, but I had followed his work for several years. And so it was really, really exciting to me to have a TC Design cage in my new car. So it's cool to have like a West Coast company have a cage on the East Coast. I really, really love his work. So it was really, really cool to have that happen.
That's awesome.
And everyone who's helped out with this car and honestly supported my racing from the start. I really got a shout out to like all my sponsors. AKG Motorsports. We use all of their parts on all of the BMWs that we use. They really just make the best stuff in the business. Hoosier Tire for helping us out with the best tire. We love the A7s, and they help us put the cars on the podium every time. They keep that grip in the cars. Epic Motorsports, we have all of the power in the cars because of Randy's tunes. He does an awesome job with tuning our cars, and that's why our cars end up on top, is because we make good power on them. Racing harness technologies. So we have a pretty special ABS system in my car. I actually taken out of a newer E46 M3 and we put it into my older one because there's differences in there. So it was cool to be able to transplant that and use some of the technology that we have there. And of course, Skip Barber Racing, I work for them, but we put on some of the best schools in the nation, and that's how we're gonna build better race car drivers.
That's awesome.
So how can we keep in contact with you and your team?
Yeah, absolutely. So you guys can follow along at highspeedmotorsports.com. We'll post news there. Also follow along on High Speed Motorsports. We'll post YouTube videos, Twitter, and Instagram stories and videos there. If you want, you guys can DM us, and we usually respond to those pretty quickly. If you want to follow my personal racing, my handle is Christina Y. Lam, and that's the same across the board when it comes to YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. You can follow all of my stuff there. I update stuff pretty regularly, especially during a race weekend.
Nice.
That's awesome. Well, we do want to thank you for coming on, and we learned a lot about you. We learned a little bit about you during your articles, and we wish you best of luck. Please stay off the walls in Thompson. They're difficult to paint. Okay, very nicely. And hopefully you will have a tremendous season. And if not, then the season it's curtailed. Have a great next year's season. So best of luck in all your racing, though.
Thank you. And thank you guys for having me. It was really great to talk to you guys.
Never.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a great night.
Yeah.
You too.
Dominating with Dawson.
It's story time. So
all right.
We started our team and everything was going along fine. We go to our first race, no problem. We go to our second race, we decide 2 cars. Still relatively no problem. Mm-hmm. Then we start going to learn how to autocross. Now we've got problems because now our car keeps breaking.
Really?
It does. Because I realized that our people are now driving in a Lemons race like it's an autocross. So instead of being
a
30-second sprint around some cones, we are now trying to drive autocross style in an endurance type race. And I think that there's a difference between, let's say, an autocross being 30, 60 seconds, somewhere around there, and something like a time attack or a sprint race, which is like 20, 30 minutes. And what we do, which is endurance racing. And I think there's a difference in the way that the driver should drive or adapt to those different. And I could be wrong. Am I wrong? I'm usually wrong. Vicky's here, so I'm definitely wrong.
I feel like maybe you're trying to use me to yell at somebody on your team. If that's the case, let's go ahead and talk about that. But
Nope.
So what you're saying is that you all went and did a couple of women's races, thought that was fun. Let's hone our skills and go to some autocross events. Did that separately. Then you returned to endurance racing, and all of a sudden everybody was bonsai crazy, trying to knock cones over and trying to hit a return in like 1,000,000 miles an hour, right?
Well, a little bit. And I think the funniest response I got was when we went to our first HPDE and Vicky learns how to go around the track, and she's learning the line, and she gets there and she comes back from the HPD and she's all confident, and she comes back from the HPD and she's on the radio screaming at us like, these people don't know where the line is. What are they doing?
Where are they going?
True.
Where are these idiots going?
What the heck?
And I'm like,
These
2 weeks ago, you
fools.
didn't know there was a line. So,
I
you know.
know. There's nobody giving me the hands. There's no handwork going on. What the heck?
So I just think there's a difference in style and a difference in approach. And you can take some things from autocross, but don't drive an autocross style for the entire race. And same thing with endurance racing. You don't apply that to an autocross because, you know.
Yeah, you'd be really slow in an autocross. If you applied all the patience and sort of measured approach stuff you learn in an endurance race, you would be a pretty slack autocrosser in your class probably, because the two things do require a different approach. With autocross, you're trying to hit the maximum amount of grip you can get plus a little bit with your tires every single, you know, turn, slalom, whatever they call those things, parking boxes, you know,
Chicago box.
Yeah, retrograde deep dish slapper pile or whatever. I don't know what they are, but it requires a ton of skill, and it requires a great timing. It requires you getting your tires really hot while you just slam a car around a course for, you know, like you said, 30 seconds to a minute 20 seconds would be a really long course, I think, for autocross. So yeah, it's an entirely different set of skills. It would be like, you know, almost analogous to saying like, I'm going to go out and drive a road course the same way I drive a dirt track, you know, oval stock car, something like that. I mean, they're very different approaches. So yeah, I certainly wouldn't go do an autocross event and think like, I've learned everything I need to know about turning left and right, and I'm going to go hit it on the endurance racing course.
So is it more the abruptness of the steering input, or is it the braking? Because I can't see the braking being terribly different. If you're doing threshold braking, you're doing threshold braking. But where would the refinement be to make a transition? Because we probably have listeners who are autocross people that may be looking to do this, and we probably have people who are time trials who are looking to do endurance racing, or endurance people who are looking to say, hey, you know, it's especially with all the stuff going on, I need to get on a track. There's an autocross, I can go do that.
Right.
What would I mean, there's certain things in common, but then you got to kind of tweak the recipe a little bit, you know, a little bit of salt here and a little bit of pepper over there. But
well, with autocross, you have to try to maximize every single thing because you don't have much time when you're trying to differentiate yourself from the rest of your class. So you're going to go maximum attack, but also if the course is set up in the right way, it's an opportunity for you to sling a car as hard as you possibly could at a turn, where if things go wrong, you're just going to spin out and knock a couple of cones over. So the consequence level is very low. So that's also a factor in how fast you can try to sling it around out there. Because the worst thing you're going to do is some dude is going to have to hike up his cargo shorts and go, you know, stand up a cone that you knocked over.
Right.
So that's sort of my take on autocross. Also, full disclosure, I'm a terrible autocrosser. I made myself do it for a year after I got an oval track go-karting just to make sure I kind of knew what out of control and Miata felt like. But I was like, I'm going to do this for a year and move on to, you know, doing track days and hopefully eventually racing, which luckily panned out. But yeah, I'm a horrible autocrosser. So that's part of my bias against it. But I'm sure if I had showed up and I was a superstar, you'd see me trying to run nationals and never even gotten all the way to a road course. But yes, that's part of my bias is definitely that I'm just not good at it. But the people who are, you know, they go out there and they're really dedicated to walking the course, you know, 4 or 5 times before the event starts, and they're running the whole course in their head with their eyes closed. And you see them making little motions, little shifting and steering motions. So those are the folks who are really like, you know, ascetic autocross devotees, but that's never going to be me. But I've done it. I did it for a year and moved on to road racing stuff. So eventually I started doing. I did a season or 2 of time trial stuff too. Is that something you guys have tried or want to talk about?
We haven't tried it yet. It's on the list. Every time we go to one that has it offered, we're always in the HPDE, so we're already spoken for. But it does look like fun.
Right. I got a chance to do it a little bit with NASA and NASA Mid-Atlantic, and it was when I was instructing, and they would let you just do it for free if you were instructing. So it was a little bit I think we always had 2 students, so that's a pretty full schedule. And then I would also try to do time trial on top of that. So I didn't have a ton of time for like car setup stuff, but it was a lot of fun. And in that case, the time trial competition is sort of adjacent to racing, but not exactly. Like if I was close to somebody who had a similar pace as me, we would try to run sort of together on the straightaways where we could game the system a little bit, maybe draft a little bit, and get a couple miles an hour. But when it came to the turns, we weren't trying to race each other. We were just sort of trying to find which one of us would be better to go through that set of turns to maximize both of our lap time. So a lot of times it was a lot of fun because you would sort of team up with somebody, even if it came down to a little bump drafting, something like that. But whatever you could do to get fast, if you kind of got to know somebody in the paddock who, like for me, it was me with my Miata, and then there was another guy who had an EG Civic, that sort of Easter egg shaped Civic from the early 90s. He had an EG Civic, so he had a little bit more power than me, so we'd always have to be a little bit faster at the end of the straightaway. So I'd make sure to be trying to pull a draft off of him down the straightaways, and then through the corners I would try to end up ahead of him. So we would usually team up and be a little bit faster than we would have been by ourselves. So that was sort of my experience with time trial racing. A lot of fun, but you are still trying to kind of really max out your own lap time while trying to stay off of everybody around you. Whereas that would be different in the racing where you're just trying to work your way through traffic. I would try to figure out how to work that guy over with the Honda and run away from him in the corners if we weren't trying to use each other for straightaway speed.
So is the difference between the let's say the 3 of these styles, is it really that the 2 shorter durations are really driving at 10 tenths or 10.1 tenths and we're less, or is it the sheer number of turns? Because you can't go around a turn at 10.1 tenths 500 times in a weekend and not miss one. I'm trying to figure out how.
Yeah, that's part of it. Part of it is the amount of risk that's associated with what you're doing dictates how hard you can hit it. So with an autocross, there's not that much risk because the worst thing you're going to do is spin out and hit nothing. So that's part of it. But also part of it is the goal. If the goal is just to get the very fastest lap time, then you're going to figure out how to run time trial laps. Where if you're out there with the time trial group, typically with NASA, you're grouped with cars that have similar power to you. At least you're sort of gridded up that way. So if nothing else, you're going to start out with kind of a flock that's going to be near you. Maybe you can kind of find somebody to sort of run with. And if you build a symbiotic relationship with somebody who's a little bit quicker down the straightaways, but you're pretty good through the turns, and you guys can usually work that out to come up to a good lap. So I would say with autocross and time trial both, you're sort of approaching it like a golfer trying to get a good run through. I don't know. I shouldn't even use a golf reference, but you're trying to play a hole in golf that's pretty tough. You don't have anybody in your way. You don't have another group playing through or anything like that. So you're trying to be all by yourself for the most part. If there's somebody near you can get a little bit of advantage off of with time trial, do that. But for the most part, you're trying to get it all to yourself, which you never really do in a crowded field in endurance racing. It's rare, especially if you're out there making production. You're passing a lot of people under your own steam. It's rare that you ever get a time trial lap, in a lemons race or something like that, or even a champ car race. If you're passing a bunch of people, then it's rare that you get the ideal lap where you get every turn the way you want it, which is the goal when you're doing time trial or something like that.
So maybe on the other side, should we be preparing our car for the endurance race to drive it as if it was a time attack, or should we know that it's going to break?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't like, to me, if I was setting my car up for a time attack and it was just going to be me driving it, I would set up a car that was not one that would make everybody else on my team happy. So right there, you're going to have differences with what people prefer with their setup. So I want a car that's loose and just crazy to try to keep under me, and everybody else on my team might want something that's a little easier to drive and not as wild. So that right there within the team, you'll have to kind of make compromises on setup right away for an endurance race. Does that make sense?
Yep. Setup wise, but what about mechanically? Should that be the goal, to have a car that you could run at 10 tenths for 20 hours? Or is that unrealistic?
Yeah, that should be your ideal. Because I mean, more and more, people have been saying this in professional endurance racing on TV, like when you watch the Rolex 24 or something like that. But I mean, for the past couple of decades, watching Le Mans, you hear the commentators say like, "Oh, they run this like a sprint the whole time, not like an endurance race," and that's become the reality even at our level. If you're one of the good teams, you're teams that are running up in the front, you are running a pretty brisk pace and nobody's taking a break. 4 or 5 years ago, there was a team that ran a second generation Camaro and what used to be jump car, and they had a sign on their dashboard that said 80%. They had enough motor and they had kind of wormed their way into having enough exceptions to the rules where they had a car that was really dominant, and they really could run that car 80% and not have to really ever push it anywhere. But for the most part, the rules keep evolving and speed creep keeps happening. So it's less and less likely that you're going to be able to go out there and pace yourself. So I would say you want to build at least toward the ideal of having a car that can run pretty hard for 16, 24 hours.
Sounds like we got some work to do, Vicky. Time to head to the garage.
That's right.
All right, time to order some new parts. Okay. Beamer World, order coming in.
There you go.
Thank you, Ben.
All right.
Does she also know our demographic?
I talked to her a little bit about it. Yeah.
Okay, good.
Trying to get new people into the sport, because that was where we figured if we could do like an introductory and like get people off their sofa, and even if it's just driving their car in a non-commuting sense, maybe an autocross or maybe a track day or maybe a track night in America or whatever, just find out that their car is not a toaster. That would be nice. Yep. And then if they want to go further, awesome. We'll be there.
Hey, you know what? If you try hard enough, you can also race a toaster.
You can, yeah. Yeah. The butter's a problem, though.
Mechanics.
That's right. What is it? The 10W30 butter. It's very. All righty.